Before we begin our class discussion, let's start our meeting with a prayer first. I want Anjali to lead the prayer. Unmute your microphone.
Right. Let's pray. Lord, thank you, Lord, for this day. Help us, Lord, to understand the lesson. And sana, Lord, na makatch up ang iba just to listen, Lord. And sana, Lord, na stable ang internet so we can listen and learn well, Lord. Just name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Bisa kayak gitu, bisa kayak kayak
Okay? So this is our official class discussion in our subject, oral communication in context. Okay, before we begin our class discussion, I want to ask this question first. What is communication? For you, Jabber, what is communication?
Communication, sir, it is the way that we use to communicate and to understand each other.
Thank you. That's correct. When we want to understand other people, we need to perform communication. How about Jacel? Jacel Gore. O, nag-mute. Jacel. What is communication? Just a phrase or a word that you think connected with the word communication. Where's Jacel? Si ano na lang. Janeline. Janeline.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
So,
what is communication for you?
Communication, sir, is how you interact with others.
How you interact to other people. That is correct. When you want to interact with other people, you want to collaborate, you want to build linkage, you want to bridge the gap, you need to perform communication. So thank you for your answers, guys. Okay. So for this class meeting, we're going to discuss the process of communication. So the lesson objectives for this discussion, at the end of the lessons, the students can define the nature of communication, distinguish its element, and demonstrate the common processes. Right, when we say communication, according to Dale, 1969, he claims it is the sharing of ideas and feelings in a mood of mutuality. So which means that according to this definition, communication refers to expressing to other people your thoughts and emotions using a common medium of communication. According to Berelson and Steiner, 1964, they state that communication is the transmission of information, ideas, emotions, and skills by the use of symbols. So based on this definition, communication refers to relaying of information from the source to the receiver, which means that there is an interaction among the participants in the communication. It can be forms of ideas, emotions, symbols, because there should be icons which represent those messages in the form of words or actions. According to Theodorson, they postulated that communication is a transmission of information, ideas, attitudes, or emotion from one person or group to another, primarily through symbols. So in communication, there should be actors or participants who perform the communication. Ruben, 1984, said that communication is any form, any information-related behavior. Okay, which means that our behavior plays an important role when it comes to communicating with other people. The way we approach, the way we interact, the way we involve things. These factors involve communication or our behavior, our attitude. Wilson, 1979, defined communication as occurring whenever the behavior of one individual and the sender influences the behavior of another, which is the receiver. Behavior can be defined as communicative to the extent that it reduces uncertainty in the behavior of another. So, which means that communication is a social interaction, just what Jeneline said earlier. Communication is a form of social interaction. And in social interaction, our motives and actions can influence other people. And the most commonly used medium to interact, which is the communication. Weiner, DeVoe, Rubino, and Geller, 1972, defined communication as necessarily involving a socially shared symbol system or code which is symbolic in nature. So we use icons and symbols which represent the message that we want to send to the receivers. We utilize our cognitive faculty to search for the exact or perfect symbols which represent the ideas, thoughts, feelings, emotions that we want to share to other people. Okay, for example, our alphabetical system, that is a common system that we use in order to share our thoughts, ideas that other people might understand. The sound, the linguistic sounds of our language. Okay, here's a quick question. Why there are various theories about communication? Just your opinion. I want to ask Erica Luis Monteliano. We discussed earlier about the different definitions of communication. So why do you think so? There are a lot of definitions about communication.
For people to communicate in different ways.
For people to communicate in different ways. That is correct. People communicate in different ways. That's why we cannot box or limit the definition of communication into just one context. Communication is contextual. Thank you. Right. Communication encompasses a great deal of human animal activity. Even animals, they communicate. Reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing images, and creating images are all acts of communication. So, for example, face-to-face interaction, that's a very obvious form of communication situation. But indirect communication, such as reading of books, watching television, watching movies, these are form of communication, but indirect in nature. Okay, have you ever wondered why celebrities, such as actors and actresses, or musicians, artists, they have influence to the viewers, to other people? It's because there's an indirect communication or indirect interaction among the TV and movie personalities and the viewers. That's why communication encompasses a great deal of human activity. There are as well many more subtle communication activities that may be conscious or unconscious, such as expression, gesture, body language, and nonverbal sounds. We call this as nonverbal communication. We can communicate with other people by not using language or words. That's what we call nonverbal communication, such as our facial expressions, our gesture. Have you ever wondered why when somebody asks us about allocation of, for example, someone asks us about the location of a 7-Eleven store, sometimes we do not utter words. We just point our finger to the location. That's a form of nonverbal communication. What is the relevance of language in communication? Okay. Leslie. First, Leslie. What is the relevance of language in communication? First, Leslie. Si ano na lang, Justin. Justin Familgan. What is your idea about the relevance or connection between language in communication?
Ano yun, sir?
What is the relevance of language in communication? What do you think is the connection between language and communication?
Para sa sir, pag pag ay
Here you go. Continue.
dili na ako ma-explain, sir. Ano yun, sir?
Why? The connection between language and communication.
Wait lang, sir. Ano, sir, ang connection, sir, pag naga-communicate ka sa isang tao with using language, sir, kay murag mas ma-understand gani, sir, ana, sir. Kanang murag ginapasabot nimo.
Okay. So, would you want to convey our thoughts, ideas, or whatever we want to share to other people? We use language in any form that you think other people can understand. So that's the relevance of language in communication. We cannot perform communication without the aid of language. Okay. Language is an abstract aspect and a sum of organization skills and principles. It is the system that governs any concrete act of communication. Linguistics generally pays more attention to language, an utterly social aspect, the one that can act as a means of communication. So basically, language is the main tool in order to communicate, or main medium in order to communicate with other people. And since we are relational beings, We need to build relationships. We need to bridge connections. And we need communication in order to do those things. We need language in order to communicate. So you see the connection among these three elements or these three factors: social interaction, communication, and language. We need to communicate, we need to socially interact with other people since we are relational beings. We need to form relationship with other people. In order to do that, we need to perform communication. In order to socially interact with them, we need to communicate with them. And we cannot communicate without the help of language as a medium of communication. Okay. Types of communication. We have verbal and non-verbal. Say verbal communication, it is the spoken or written conveyance of a message. Basically, when we say verbal communication, it is the spoken or written communication. When we say nonverbal, nonverbal communication describes the processes of conveying a type of information in the form of non-linguistic representations. Examples of nonverbal communication include haptic communication. Say haptic, it's the use of touch, or it refers to touch. The way you physically touch other people, it could implicate the type of relationship with the person you are communicating with and the message that you are sending. So that is haptic communication, the use of touch. When we say chronemic communication, it refers to time. It speaks a lot about your personality and character, which means that communication is behavioral, as what we have discussed earlier. Chronemic communication also speaks a lot about the culture. For example, we have what we call Filipino time. When we have a meeting which starts at 9:50, but other people, because it's Filipino time, they join the meeting at 10 or 10:30, ganon. So when you say chronemic communication, it also reflects the culture of the people. You also have the gestures, body language, facial expressions, and eye contact. And that's what we call kinesthetics. The body language, the gestures, facial expressions. Anything that refers to physical activities, the movement of your body. Communication is also a process that includes the following elements: the participants, context, messages, channels, noise, and feedback. So these are the elements of communication, or the factors that affect the communication. We have the participants. Participants are the communicators who are both senders and receivers. As senders, they encode or transform their thoughts and feelings into messages through verbal symbols and nonverbal behavior. As receivers, they decode or process the received messages and behavior and react to them. Say, when we say participants in a communication situation, there are what we call the senders and receivers. So basically, when we say senders, the one who transmit the message, his or her thoughts or feelings, the ideas, notions, or whatever he or she wants to convey to other people. We have receivers, the one who decode, who interpret, who understand the message. Next is context. Context refers to the interrelated conditions of communication which affect how people understand the message. So when we say context, it refers to the elements or factors that can affect the other people or the participants themselves to understand and transmit the message. It could be external or internal. Context, also called as the milieu in communication. Okay, we have physical context, social context, psychological context, cultural context, and historical context. To say physical context, it includes the setting where the communication takes place, the time of the day, the environmental condition, such as temperature, lighting, and noise level, distance between or among communicators, excuse me, or among communicators, the seating arrangement, and other concrete elements. Okay, when we say physical context, it refers to the physical attributes that affect the communication. Okay, for example, in our situation, we're having virtual or online class meetings. The internet connection, the device that we're using, the temperature of your room, these things can affect the communication. Or if we're having face-to-face classes, the atmosphere of the classroom, the environmental condition, the ventilation, if the classroom is conducive or not conducive, these things can affect the communication. We have the social context. It refers to the nature of relationships existing between or among the communicators, and it also sets the formality of the interaction, how messages are formed, shared, and understood depend on whether the interaction takes place among family members, friends, work, associates, or strangers. So social context basically refers to the relationship between or among the participants in a communication. There's difference when you communicate with your friends. There's difference when you communicate with your teacher. There's difference when you communicate with your classmates. There's difference when you communicate with your family members, with your siblings, with your parents, or to the people in authority. So, for example, we have what we call social distance or power distance. In the Philippines, we pay high regard to our bosses, to our teachers, to the persons in authority. But when we interact or communicate with our friends, especially those who are close to us, there's intimacy, there's informality because we are comfortable doing this kind of communication with them. So your relationship between or among the participants in a communication can affect how you communicate with them. So we have psychological context. It involves the communicator's moods and feelings. To illustrate, the same joke can either amuse or anger a person depending on his or her mood. So the psychological state or mental state of a person can affect the communication. For example, you have a close friend. You used to tease her or joke with her. It's really fine. Usually it's really fine that you crack jokes with one another. But there's one instance that he or she's not happy, your friend is not happy of your joke. It's not that there's multiple meanings about his or her response to your joke. It can be your joke is offensive or he or she is not on his or her mood. It seems like there's something that is bothering her or him. That's why the response of the joke is different from the usual response when you crack jokes to one another. So you see the psychological or mental state of the participants can affect the communication. We have cultural context. It comprises of beliefs, values, and norms shared by a large group of people. Because of cultural context, people share the same race and culture, interact easily, while people often experience dead air when talking to others from different cultures. Okay. Our culture, collectively or individually, can affect the way we view things around us and even within us. So the same way we communicate with other people. Okay, we need to consider the belief system of other people. We need to consider cultural taboos or words that are forbidden or prohibited to talk bluntly in a conversation. We need to understand that Tagalogs usually say opo and po, while others are not. So you see the cultural differences of people can affect the communication. We need to understand why Muslims are kind of strong whenever they talk and other cultural aspects. Okay, have you noticed some of your classmates, when they talk, they normally shout or they normally nag. It's not that they are angry. It's just that's their usual way of talking to other people. Matingala kasi mga classmates nga nung magsinagitay magstorya. Sometimes it's normal because that's the way they used to talk. Maybe in their house or with their friends. We have historical context. It involves the background provided by previous interactions between or among the communicators which affect understanding of the current exchange. So when we say historical context, it refers to the prior situation that affect the current communication. Okay, for example, you wonder when you talk to your friend or to your classmate, she just shrugged her shoulder. She just shrugged. Ganun lang yung response niya. So probably you said something earlier that might hurt her or might offended her. So which means that previous or prior communication can affect the present communication. And next we have the message. It refers to the speaker's meanings, ideas, and feelings. The message can be delivered by the speaker verbally or non-verbally, and then received and interpreted by the listener based on his or her personal ideas and feelings. Okay, when you say message, it is the content of the communication. Okay, the communication isn't complete without its gist. And the gist is the message. Message contains the information, ideas, feelings that you want to share during the communication process. It can be verbally or non-verbally. You can use words or you can use facial expressions or body gestures. And the receiver might understood or decode the message based on his or her personal ideas and feelings. We have channels. The speaker sends messages through channels which transmit his or her ideas and feelings to the listener. The two major channels are visual and auditory. Okay, when we see channel is the transmission tool in order to send your message. So you have a message. How can you transmit or how can you convey your message to the receiver or to the other participants in the communication? you need to use channels. Given that you have already a message to send, but how can you send that? It's through channels. It could be visual or auditory. Say visual, for example, written communication letter, or auditory, use of sound. The visual channel enables communicators to send and receive visible information such as hand gestures, bodily movements, and facial expressions. The auditory channel, on the other hand, enables listeners to receive information and interpret it through the tone, volume, and pitch of the speaker's voice. So for visual channel, as what I have said earlier, it could be written form of communication, such as letters, memorandum, or personal message in Facebook or email. To say auditory, the sound. We interpret the meaning of the message through the voice of the sender of the message. It could be the tone, the volume, the pitch of the speaker's voice. This is what we call paralinguistics. And we have noise. Noise means distractions that interfere with the accurate transmission and reception of a message. Basically, when we say noise, it is a factor that can disrupt or distract the communication. It could affect how we send the message or how we understand the message. We have external noise. It refers to sights, sounds, and any other distractions in the environment, like the passing of an attractive man or woman, non-stop cat calls, or cigarette smoke in a crowded room. Just like in our situation, the poor internet connection, the specifications of the device, these things can disrupt the communication or interrupt. We have internal noise, distractions within the communicator, such as psychological and biological noise, like hearing loss or illness, and psychological noise, like daydreaming or worrying. So we have external noise and we have internal noise. Internal noise, it refers to the struggles of the communicators themselves. It could be psychological and biological. Say psychological, such as the mental state of the person, say biological or the physiological factors like loss of hearing or any physical illnesses. We also have semantic noise, unintentional meanings caused by certain symbols, ethnic slurs, profanity, and vulgar speech like his woman, where woman is misinterpreted as mistress. So semantic noise, this refers to the meanings, the confusion of meanings. For example, in our situation, in the Philippines, there are a lot of indigenous languages. There are a lot of languages. We have Tagalog, Cebuano, ano pa? Muslim languages, yun siya. For example, in Tagalog words, when we say, what do you call that? No, in Cebuano language, you say langgam. In Tagalog, it means ants. But in our language, say langgam, it refers to bird. But in Tagalog, it refers to ants. So that's an example of how can the meanings cause confusion to the communication. semantic noise. And we have feedback. It signifies and or nonverbal responses to messages like murmurings or asides, nods, and or facial expressions. Through feedback, the sender will know whether and how his or her message is heard, seen, and understood. Okay, when we say feedback, basically it refers to the reply or response of the receiver of the message. So through feedback, we will able to know how the receiver of the message understood or react to the message that you send to the receiver. So we say feedback, it is the response or reply. And you can also use verbal and non-verbal communication when you send your feedback to the message of the sender. If the verbal or nonverbal response indicates that the message is not understood, the sender finds another way of encoding the message. Okay, sometimes when the receiver of the message do not understand the way we want them to understand the message, or if they have different interpretation of the message. So what we're trying to do is that we use another way or another strategy in order to send the message the way that the receiver will understand what we are trying to imply in our message. The re-encode message is also a feedback because it gives meaning to the receiver's response. So your reply to the feedback of the receiver is also a feedback because that is how you react or respond to the feedback of the receiver. Okay. Guidelines in communicating effectively. So there are instances that we cannot communicate effectively to other people. Thus, we need to know what are the usual techniques or guidelines in order to successfully communicate with other people. First is use concise and simple words. So in order for you to be understood by other people, you use simple words. Concise, meaning short but direct. Take note of the environment where you are speaking and adjust your voice accordingly. So you need to understand the context of the communication, the kind of environment that you are in during you perform the communication. Okay, for example, when you are having a class discussion, it's not appropriate to talk to your classmates, especially if that is not a scholarly discussion or academic discourse. So you need to adjust to the environment or to the context of the communication. Next is use verbal and nonverbal means to get your message across clearly. So sometimes we supplement our communication with nonverbal tools in order to emphasize what we're trying to say or in order to emphasize the message that we want to send to the other people in the communication. Next is consider your listener's context. So you need to understand the background of your receiver, the receiver of your message, or the listener. You need to understand them. Pay attention to your nonverbal cues because sometimes nonverbal cues can cause confusion, like your facial expression, like your hand gestures. So you need to employ the appropriate nonverbal cues in order to successfully convey your message. If your listener doesn't understand your message, try to rephrase your statement or use gesture. So if the other participants in a communication did not understand your message, you paraphrase or you reconstruct your message or use gestures in order to emphasize your message. After speaking, give your listener a chance to share his or her feedback. So if the communication needs to have an interaction between or among the participants, as a speaker, you need to give chance to the listener to reply or respond to your message. On the part of the listener, practice self-awareness by being conscious of your own behavior, feelings, and habits when listening to a speaker. So which means that you need to behave properly when it comes to communicating with other people. It doesn't mean that you need to be formal at all times, but you need to behave the kind of the kind of behavior which is appropriate, be it in intimate or formal context. Avoid being distracted by listening actively and paying close attention to the speaker. You need to have a presence of mind when you listen to other people, because sometimes most of the conflicts and misunderstandings only caused by without fully understanding the meaning of the message. So you need to actively listen to the speaker. Use nonverbal cues such as nodding to show that you are listening. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to reply with words all the time. By just using hand gestures, using facial expressions in order to show to the speaker that you are listening. Focus on the speaker and maintain eye contact during the conversation so that the connection between you runs smoothly. So, which means that you need to build a rapport. The participants in the communication should need to build a rapport, and it's a two-way. The speaker should perform eye contact to the listeners, while the listeners should perform eye contact to the speaker. If unsure about what you heard, clarify with the speaker if your understanding of the message is right. So if you want to clarify the way you understand the message, so you can talk to the listener, but you need to do it in a proper way. Provide feedback to let the speaker know that you listened to and understood what he or she said. So in order for the speaker to be aware or to be conscious that you know or you understand what he or she is trying to say, the message of the communication, you need to send a feedback or reply. Okay. Listening. The first duty of love is to listen, according to Paul Tillich. A speech is but one half of a dialogue. The other half is listening. In the absence of listening, the process and art of communication is a failure. This is precisely why Epictetus said that nature has given to man one tongue, but two ears that we may hear from others twice as much as we speak. So, listening is very important. It's not just It's not just that you are good or you are great speaker. You need to be also a good listener in order to successfully communicate with other people. Okay, do you have questions? That's the end of my lesson. Okay, do you have questions? Clarifications? Okay, guys, please unmute your microphone. I want to hear your response. Okay na tayo? Kasi most of you turned off your video.
Okay na, sir.
Okay na? Sure?
Hello.
Did you understand the lesson?
Yes, sir. Sir.
What? Okay, if you don't have a question anymore, I think that's the end of our discussion. By the way, Sir Mark asked a favor from me that he will use our time in ATP. Kasi what happened earlier, your class meeting was disrupted, right? In MIL ba yun? I don't know what's the subject, but he asked a favor from me. So we will not meet later for our AAPP. Sir Mark will use the time for his subject, but he will give me a time sa MIL yata ninyo. But I will give you an update about that. And Sir Mark will also announce about that. Okay, are we clear? We won't meet later in our APP subject. Sir Mark will use the time. Okay, if you don't have questions anymore, I think that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. It's 10:39 pa. Sige lang. You just have to answer your the assessment activities in the module. So that's it. You may leave the virtual meeting na.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.